I'll just tell you a little bit about AAUW for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It's renowned as one of the world's largest sources of funding for graduate women. And in 2017-2018, the academic year, $3.7 million was awarded to 250 women in the United States and from other countries. In California, we have 26 fellowship and grant recipients this year, and we have 7 here in Southern California. So we actually have 6 of the fellows with us today, so we're very fortunate. In 1920, AAUW members raised over $156,000 to purchase a gram of radium for Marie Curie. And when she finished using that money, her daughter used it for a while, and the remainder was used to start the Marie Curie Postdoctoral Fellowship. Dr. Joyce Brothers, the astronaut Judith Resnick, and the author Susan Sontag are also fellowship recipients, or were. Funding for the fellowship and grant recipients is provided by the interest earned from AAUW endowments. And because only the interest is used, those endowments will last in perpetuity. So the women you meet today are funded by various endowments. It usually takes more than one. If you look in your program behind the agenda, you'll see the endowments that are funding the women today and here today. So just the interest on those endowments. American fellowships are awarded to women scholars completing doctoral dissertations, conducting postdoctoral research, or finishing research for publication. They must be permanent residents or American citizens, Because only the interest is used, they will be funded for indefinitely each year, the endowments. Ida Street, a pioneer in the field of Native American history, was the first recipient of an endowment in 1888. We'll hear from 3 American Fellows today. And so if you'll look in your program, my hostesses, if you'll look, we'll have you come up in order that you're listed in the program. So we'll start with Lynn Batchelor and Colby. And then Pat and Judy, if you'll just follow up right after that.
Thank you, everyone. It's my privilege to introduce Colby Lynch, who is a USC, she's an American Fellow, and will be majoring in American Studies. Colby researches criminalization, gender violence, and social movements in California. She incorporates the analysis of imprisoned people in California's women's prisons, including survivors of gender violence who are incarcerated without parole possibilities. So I asked if she ever had any time besides studying, and if so, what did she do with her time? And she said, well, really, she's an activist. And so she doesn't have a lot of time to do anything else, but she is trying to get back into surfing, which is something she did in her past life. She's originally from Toronto, but she has been in America since 1995 when she was a student at Wellesley. So without further ado, here's Colby.
I probably brought too many belongings. Hi everyone, thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you all so much for having me, and thank you so much to AAUW for being an amazing organization. I'm just learning more about how you work and what you do, and I'm very impressed with what you managed to do as an all-volunteer, for the most part, organization. So thank you so much for having me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. It's cutting out a little. And then a bit about my research. 1 second. Okay. So I grew up in Canada and then went to college on the East Coast, and that's where I learned more about what's happening at the intersections of incarceration and criminalization and gender violence and some of the particular impacts of imprisonment on women and girls. And so after college, I moved to New York, and I actually did social work, anti-eviction work in New York on the West Side in Harlem. And then on the side, I started volunteering with a project that was visiting women in prison who were supposed to be released. They ended up holding people past their time, and we ended up getting more involved, taking family members and kids up to see them, and that was my introduction to kind of what's happening in the women's prisons, and in prison in general. So that was in 2000. I look I look younger than I am. So I am 40 this year. Thank you. I've been working on trying to look a little older, because sometimes it works to my disadvantage. I started the work with women in prison in New York in 2000, and then I moved out to the Bay Area in 2002. And when I moved out to the Bay, I already knew about this community group called the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, and the hub is in the Bay. And so I immediately started to volunteer there also while I was continuing to do other homeless and housing youth work. And then eventually my life kind of just steered more and more in the direction of work with women in prison because of what I learned through the relationships with the women that I would visit, about the ways that their path to incarceration and all of the limits in terms of their potential paths to freedom. And so in the meantime, I did other work for pay, and then eventually applied to grad school because I was looking to explore more some of the ways that some of the severe sentencing happens, and to try to understand how to do better at sentencing reform at the intersections of gender violence and criminalization. So then I applied to grad school, and then I got very, very sick with Lyme disease. It was late diagnosed. It sounds like some people in the room are familiar with what happens when it's late diagnosed. So I was bedridden for years and in severe pain, and didn't know that if I would ever recover, and ended up having multiple surgeries, including brain surgery and spine surgery and various things. Anyway, so I had just gotten into grad school before this happened. And so I continued to defer year after year, and the program at USC, which is American Studies and Ethnicity, was generous about working with me. I mean, some people could call that just right, but it seemed like it wasn't usual, to keep delaying my return to grad school. So then eventually, in my mind, after years of being bedridden and very, very sick, I was starting to get better. So it was my last chance to go and not lose the spot. And I had felt like I had already missed out on quite a lot in those years, and I couldn't really manage emotionally the idea of saying no, even though all of my friends were like, you are not well enough to start this program. So I started, and when I started, I still had an IV port in my arm, and I still was running like 3 different IVs a day, including ketamine, which is a really intense pain med and also recreational drug. So I would just run the new classrooms at USC, they have those kind of sliding hooks for, I don't know what they usually use them for, but they were perfect for the IV bags. So I would just hang the bags and run the IVs. At this point, it had become so normalized for me and my friends who had taken care of me and my family through that time in the Bay, but it wasn't normal to anybody else. So, it created quite a scene in that first year, and everybody adjusted and so on. But it turned out that it was too soon for me to get back to that kind of that level of engagement outside of the home, basically. So I ended up deferring for another year, and then returning after that and being more, fit to do grad school. So, and then I've had a couple other blocks along the way because I continue to have health problems that seem very mysterious, which is also very common for people with late diagnosed Lyme disease. So I've had multiple surgeries throughout my time at USC, including heart surgery just a year ago, yesterday. And so it's possible, so I am now just kind of accepting that this might be an ongoing thing. And I say all this not as a pity party because I actually am I'm very lucky to be back to a mostly functional life, because a lot of people that I met along the way could never get better or could never get out of pain. And so there's so much more research that needs to happen in terms of late stage Lyme disease, and there's so little, and there's such a particular impact on, I think, women, and nobody knows why. But I'll just put it out there in case, since I know there's some scientists in the room, that I think that there is a connection between these chronic pain diseases and perhaps hormones or something, because there's so many more women who are getting the longer term chronic, incurable forms of these diseases, and nobody knows why. That's just something I've noticed, not my area of research, but I'm really hoping that over time, people will focus there. And so I continue to be in treatment, but I'm, back to my life 90% of the time. And because of the ways that slowed down my grad school career, having support and funding from AAUW has been a huge gift to me, because I, between balancing, ongoing treatment, ongoing surgeries, unfortunately, and also teaching, and on the years that I didn't have fellowship from USC, and doing the coursework, and doing my activism, you can see where this is going, right? It starts to feel kind of impossible. So it was such a gift and honor to be able to receive these funds this year from you all and from all of your cohorts across the country. So thank you all so much for that. And then the other way that I'm especially thankful is because when I go into talking about the research a little bit more, the work that I do, because the women that I work with are so severely marginalized and in many ways disappeared. These are women serving very long life sentences and life without parole and death sentences and because community-based research and activism is also fairly marginalized in the academic world, that it's just huge to have support for an activist-based project that's community-based. So what I'm focusing on in particular is the rise of life without parole sentencing across the U.S. and in particular in California. And I'm trying to understand that rise. So sort of who were the key players, and I've learned a lot about how that's happened, and then in particular in California, what's happened in terms of legislative reform, ballot initiatives, different laws that have been passed that have mandated life without parole, and then what's happening in the world of prosecution, where there's actually quite a bit of discretion about how to charge people and what that mandates in terms of your sentence. So just to give a little bit of a sense, oops, the pages are upside down, classic. Okay. So in this time where there's more conversation and more awareness about mass incarceration and some of its impacts on communities, in particular poor communities, communities of color, there is not as much attention being paid to some of the most severe sentences, right? So at the same time that we are making, I think, good progress in reforms for shorter term sentences, the rise of life sentences is actually huge across the U.S. So where, for example, public support for the death penalty wanes, life without parole has emerged as one of the fastest growing sentences in the U.S. Between 1984 and 2013, the number of people serving life without parole in the U.S. has quadrupled. And while the death penalty sentencing increased by 31%, which is a decrease, between 1992 and 2003, life without parole increased by 170%. And between 1992 and 2008, the total population of people serving life without parole in the U.S. grew 230%. When we match that with the fact that women and girls are the fastest growing population of people who are being incarcerated, and in particular women of color and girls of color, and we look at the rise of these most severe sentencing changes, then we can see sort of what, some of the problems that come to play. And one of the main ways that life without parole has been increasing, as far as I've been, coming to understand it, is that the anti-death penalty movement has offered life without parole as the, quote, most humane alternative. And this is a pretty standard movement strategy in the anti-death penalty world, and part of what I'm trying to bring attention to, which is what I've been hearing from people inside the prisons for many, many years, this is a short-sighted strategy and a dangerous strategy, because what it's done is created this whole other growing population of people people serving this severe sentence that's very under scrutinized, and doesn't have any of the protections that have been written in by activists trying to build in protections for people to appeal their death penalty sentences. So we have this new category that has basically the same racial and gender disparities and class disparities, but without any of the protections. So there's no mandated representation, and the list goes on from there. So my particular interest is looking at the impacts of life without parole sentencing on women in California prisons. And the way that I'm researching that is both by looking at historical records, but also by working directly with the women who are incarcerated, surveying who's there serving life without parole. There's about 200 women in California. What are the common patterns across their sentences? I would say the most common pattern is that the majority are domestic violence survivors and were convicted for actions that were directly related to that survival. So I'm just going to give you two quick examples. One is a woman, Kelly Savage, I've been working with for 12 years, and she was given life without parole when she was trying to escape her abusive husband with her 2 kids. She had called the domestic violence hotline. This was in the Central Valley in the 90s. That she had followed every bit of their advice, which is to make it appear like things were normal, pay the rent, do the errands, and meanwhile she had packed a bag that they also told her to do with her children's birth certificates. She left the house, he found the bag and the bus tickets and the gift birth certificates, and he severely beat and killed her son from her previous marriage. So she was they put her in jail over the weekend, saying that they were trying to protect her and were worried about her. And by Monday, they were charging both her and her abusive husband with the death of their child. So she was a poor, uneducated, she was working on her education, which was threatening the relationship at the time, but she was a poor, mostly uneducated, and disabled because of severe abuse, and she was 4, woman who was trying to do everything right to take care of her kids and to get to safety, and she was punished in this very, very severe way. So the thing about Kelly Savage is that her story sounds really extreme, and it is totally not exceptional. So we work now with almost all of the 200 women who are serving life without parole in the women's prisons, and it's story after story like this. So the only other one I'll just highlight quickly is this woman, Tammy Garvin, who was trafficked, brought into sex trafficking at 14, and by 32, her pimp, who she was also in an abusive relationship with, killed somebody that she was supposed to be servicing, and then blamed her. And then when it came to trial, but then also admitted to it, which was on the record. But then when it came to trial, she was testifying against him, and she, in her jail cell, where he was in a, adjacent unit, got a letter in there threatening to kill her and threatening to kill her father, and she knew that it was a real threat. So the next day she went back and recanted her testimony. He was acquitted, and she was given life without parole. So these are very, very common stories, and there's a set of laws that make this easier for prosecutors to actually enact. And that set of laws has been passed through kind of some complicated alliances of groups in California, including the Prison Guards Union and some of the more conservative, punitive crime victims groups. So a lot of my research is looking into some of those alliances and how they've passed quite a few laws sort of under the radar that make it really easy for prosecutors to add I just lost the word. It's not an enhancement, but a special circumstance to a murder charge, and then that mandates life without parole. So they've been able to add like 18 special circumstances to the penal code, which makes it very easy for a prosecutor to say, okay, so in Kelly's case, they added torture because her husband tortured the child. And a torture special circumstance mandates life without parole. So, and in all of these cases, right, they were not allowed to have domestic violence experts in the courtroom, even though some of these women, even in the depths of their survival, asked for it. They weren't allowed to have experts in trafficking, sex trafficking, what those relationships look like, right? So part of the work that we do on the activist side is we're trying to get these cases back into the courts, or we're trying to get the governor to commute these sentences. And so for anybody who wants to actually take action in some of those cases, we have a petition out for Kelly right now for the governor to commute her sentence. We're going to have a petition soon for Tammy, who was the young woman who was sex trafficked. And so, but related to the activism in my work is that part of what I'm trying to do is center the analysis and also the movement strategy coming out of the women who are organizing against this kind of sentencing from within the prisons, right? So this is what everything that I've learned about all of these cases and all of these kind of patterns are from working directly with the women who are incarcerated. And a lot of these women also run all of the positive programming in the prison that the prisons aren't doing themselves, right? So they run domestic violence groups. They've all learned so much about trauma and the context that many of them were surviving. And they're doing so much to support each other through that. So my research does a combination of interviewing incarcerated people, formerly incarcerated people. Unfortunately, there are very few people who are formerly incarcerated who were serving life without parole sentences for the obvious reason. But there is an increasing number in part because the governor's office right now is actually commuting some people sentenced to life without to a parole eligible sentence. So 2 of the survivors that we worked with have recently been commuted, and we're pushing for many more before his term is up. And I've never seen anything like this, so we're really trying to use the opportunity wisely. And I think, how am I on time? Time to wrap up? Okay. Okay, I'm sure I've given you more than enough. I'm so happy to be here. I thank you again so much for the work, and also I want to thank you on behalf of the incarcerated women that I'm working with. They also understand the struggle to be centered in research, and there's so little research about currently incarcerated people and about women in particular. So the only study that I've actually read that directly interviews people serving life without parole is a study that is pretty extensive. It's a sociological study. It's 200 men that they interviewed about their experiences serving life without parole. And it's pretty grueling. It shows you all the ways that the sentence is that people face discrimination inside against programming and such. And then at the end, it uses it as an opportunity to recommend it as a punishment because it is so terrible. So that's what we're working with right now. Not a mention of women there at all. So I'm hoping to make some interventions there and to center prisoner subjects and their voice in the picture as well. Thank you so much.
I'm Pat Ferrer, and I'm honored to present Dr. Littlejohn. Crystal is a graduate of Occidental College. Upon completing her undergraduate degree, she immediately attended Stanford University for her PhD. However, you can't keep us Southern Californians up north too long. She's back at Occidental as a professor. I am especially proud to say that her fellowship was partially funded from interest from the Jean Aldridge Fellowship. This was established by the estate of one of our honorary life, beloved, hardworking past president, Long Beach branch members, Jean Aldridge. I'll let Crystal talk a little bit more about what she does, her area of study. It's medical sociology, certainly an area I had not heard of. So welcome, Crystal.
Hi everyone. Thank you all so much for hosting us, and thank you very, very much to AAUW for your generosity in funding these fellowships. I guess I just want to say it's an honor to follow you. Kobe your story was so inspiring. I'll tell you a little bit about my background. Can you all see me? I know it's quite short, so.
Take the microphone off.
Okay. Okay, is that better? Okay, perfect. And I'll also stand in front a little bit, so hopefully you can also see me better. Okay. So I'm originally from Boyle Heights in Los Angeles, so it's in the East LA area. And I grew up in the projects, and when I got to college, I thought that college was just an opportunity for me not to be poor. My family, told me from the time that I was a very young girl that, education was the way. You and your sister are so bright. You're gonna go to college. You're gonna escape poverty. And then I took a sociology class, my very first semester at Oxy, and I fell in love with sociology. And I realized that college had so much more to offer me than just getting me a college degree so that I could get a good job and escape poverty. And I became really, really interested in using sociology to solve social problems. And as you can imagine, growing up in the projects, my dad got his GED when I was in elementary school, and he was he had me when he was a little older, so he was about 41. So when he got his GED, he was probably nearing 50 years old. And my mom ended up graduating from college when I was a sophomore in college. And so growing up, I had no idea what professors did. I didn't know what a professor was. And then I got to Occidental, and this is near and dear to my heart, especially now as an AAUW fellow. I had a female professor at Occidental tell me, I think you should go to graduate school. I think that you should consider becoming a professor. And so we had to have conversations about how do I go about becoming a professor. So I went back to my dorm room, and I kid you not, I started Googling how to become a professor. And I learned that to become a professor, I had to get a PhD. I could get a master's degree, or I could get a PhD, and they're more likely to be funded. And so as you can imagine, I said, okay, I'm going to apply to PhD programs. And so senior year, I was a sociology and Spanish double major, and I almost didn't follow through because I was working on 2 theses, and you can imagine it was exhausting. But I had professors in my corner saying, you're going to do it, you have to apply. And so I applied my senior year and decided to go to Stanford in the fall after I graduated from Oxy. And so my research looks at women's experiences with gender inequality and how understandings of bodies and gender shape birth control use and inequality in relationships. The funding that I received from AAUW helped me finish writing the first draft of my book, which is amazing to be able to say that. I was just joking at my table that when I first started writing the book, I was a little nervous about telling people. They'd say, what are you working on? And it almost felt like a question when I would answer, like, I think I'm working on a book. Because I was so nervous, right, that maybe I wouldn't finish the book, or maybe they were going to follow up with me in 6 months and say, how'd the book go? And I'd have to say, I never said I was writing a book. You know, it's not quite going the way I hoped it would. But funding from AAUW supported me in finishing the draft of my book, and I'm now working on revising it to send to publishers. And so what I did in the book is I used interview data. So we interviewed over 100 women in the Bay Area when I was a graduate student. I was project manager and lead interviewer for the College of Personal Life Study. And we talked with young women about their experiences using birth control, their experiences navigating pregnancy with their partners. And so what I do in the book is I look at women's experiences to examine how understandings of men's and women's bodies shapes expectations of birth control use in relationships. So thinking about how particular birth control gets assigned to particular bodies. So the condom becomes understood as a man's method, and the pill, for example, becomes understood as the woman's method, and really interrogating that to see, is it really necessary that we think about birth control as being tied to particular bodies, and what are the consequences of having that as a framework. And so what I argue is, I think I hinted at, is that it's not necessary as a sociologist, right? It's not actually necessary for us to think about birth control being tied to bodies in the way that we do, and that a large part of the reason we do that is because of understandings of gender. And so in the book I show that because of these understandings, women face incredible responsibility for preventing pregnancy in relationships. They're largely blamed for pregnancies when pregnancies do occur and they were not intended, but also it can increase their risks of contracting sexually transmitted diseases, because since they don't understand condoms as their method, they're less likely to bring condoms, and because their male partners don't understand them as their method either, they might push back against condom use when women assert their rights to use condoms as a birth control method. So I'm working on revising that book right now. Some of my other work examines how clinicians talk about birth control with patients. I'm particularly interested in how we talk about side effects to birth control. And so I have a paper coming out now that looks at how medical providers are, how they discuss the uncertainty of side effects to birth control, and how that can potentially encroach on women's reproductive autonomy. And for my next project, which is a ways away, but it's kind of funny how these things work out. When I first started my book, I thought, how am I ever going to write a book? And then maybe a couple months into writing, I thought, for my next book project, what I'm going to do is X. And so now that my first book is written and I'm just editing, I'm really looking forward to looking at my next project that looks at how women, men, and medical providers understand planning for pregnancy, and kind of interrogating family planning as a type of social logic that doesn't always play out on the ground in people's individual experiences around birth control use, and thinking about how family planning as a logic can also coexist with other approaches to pregnancy and other approaches to birth control that can potentially encroach on people's experiences and opportunities to use birth control when they want to prevent pregnancy. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to talk more and answer any questions that you have about my research. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. And the title of my book is His Condom and Her Birth Control, and it's a long title, Academics. His Condom and Her Birth Control, Pregnancy Prevention, and the Social Construction of Sex and Gender. And I'm happy to follow up if anybody has more thoughts.
Hi, I'm Judy Horan, and I'm so glad to be here today. This is always a special afternoon, and made more special because I'm seeing people that I don't see that often anymore. So nice to see old friends and to make new friends, and especially to introduce someone who's studying under my endowment along with some other endowments. And I know the Redlands branch is here today, so give them a shout out. And the Los Angeles branch is also sponsoring this endowment, and Susan Riley endowment is also one that Irma's studying under. So Irma Ortiz comes to us actually pretty locally. She's a San Fernando Valley girl. I don't know whether I'm saying that as a compliment or not, but you know how we used to say the Valley girls. Anyway, but she is studying, to my great surprise and wonder, at the University of California at Riverside, since I live in Corona. So this is the closest fellow I've had, and I like to keep in touch with the fellows. And she's a very interesting young woman. I know that she really eventually wants to teach, so all of us in the room who have had anything to do with education, we want her to continue in that career, and she wants to help girls learn science. So there we go. All those good people out there. She is a biology major. Her specialization is plant molecular biology, and you certainly want to hear about that from her, not from this English major. So, Irma.
Thank you, Judy, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me, or should I raise it a little bit higher? There. Can everyone hear me now? Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Irma Ortiz, and I would like to thank everyone here for coming and for listening to us fellows, and just for bringing us here and funding us, because this is a great opportunity for all of us to network and get to know you, and for everyone to get to know us, and hopefully we will be in your shoes one day as well. I would like to first introduce myself. Just like Judy said, I am a San Fernando Valley girl. However, my parents immigrated from Mexico when they were in their 20s. They lived in San Fernando most of their life. Then I am the firstborn child, so I am firstborn, then it's my brother. So the reason why they came to California was because they were looking for a better life for their children that would be born and raised here in the U.S., since they knew the hardships that they dealt with when they were in Mexico. Now, I am very fortunate that my parents decided to make that decision. Because of that reason is why I stand here today speaking to you. Otherwise, I would not have had the opportunity to be in the University of California system. I say that because I did my undergraduate degree at UCLA in bachelor's in molecular cell and developmental biology, and actually a minority in Chicano studies as well. The reason why I decided to do science was because when I was in high school at James Monroe High School, which is in North Hills in the San Fernando Valley, my high school biology teacher said to me when I spoke with him that I would like to do a major in biology at UCLA, he said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And I responded saying, "Oh, yes, this is my favorite class. Before, when I was elementary and middle school, I thought science wasn't exciting, and I actually didn't see myself as doing science, since what I saw on TV was usually not people that looked like female scientists. So when I found out that I liked science, I said I'm going to do a major in science and see where that leads. To be honest, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, because I knew I didn't want to be a medical doctor, and most people in science majors as undergraduate decide they want to go into the pre-med route, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to teach, and I had no idea that research existed, because as I say, my parents came from Mexico. They did not have a college education, so I had no idea what to do if I decided to be a science major. And going back to what my teacher from high school said, that he didn't see me as a person that was ready to go into UCLA as a science major. He said that because of the fact that I was very shy and kept to myself, that it was better if I went to a smaller college where there were mostly females. And I say this because I applied to Mount St. Mary's College, which I really liked as well. It's a private Catholic all-females college. However, when my dream school always was UCLA since I was little. And that's because when I was in elementary, they took us to a field trip to UCLA, and I really loved the institution. I said, this is where I want to be when I grow up. However, my teacher told me, I don't see you going there because it's so competitive and difficult. And I said, well, I'm going to give it a try. And I was telling Judy that because of that, it kind of pushed me to say, well, I guess I'll show you that I can do this. And it actually helped me stay in the science track. And at the beginning, I was having a lot of trouble adjusting to a big institution and the workload. And I commuted from the San Fernando Valley to UCLA because I could not afford the rent at Westwood, which is very expensive. So I was commuting from home, taking public transportation to UCLA and coming back. However, I was involved in many tutoring programs. I found mentors that helped me, but at the beginning I struggled. And also, when I would go see counselors, sometimes they would say, are you sure you want to stay in the science track? You know, you're in your second year, so you can make a switch right now if you'd like. And I said, I remember what my high school teacher said, and I said, no, I think I'll stick with it. Now, I was very fortunate to meet a professor called Dr. Ann Hirsch at UCLA. She is the most influential person in my life, aside from my parents. She really motivated me to stick in science. She asked me to do research in her lab, and I worked with peas that are a model system for to test if bacteria that have plant growth promoting benefits for plants. What I did is I inoculated this bacteria onto the peas and found that the peas are able to grow better with certain beneficial bacteria. Even though we think of bacteria as being detrimental to plants, there are actually beneficial bacteria in the soil. And I studied these bacteria for a year and a half in her lab. Then she asked me if I wanted to go to graduate school, and I said I wasn't sure. So then she said, why don't you become a research assistant in my lab for a couple of months and decide what you would like to do. And during that time, she asked me to go to conferences with her. I went to the Botanical Society of America, American Society of Plant Biologists, the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. And that's when I found out that this is something that I want to do. I would like to do research, and I would like, just like Dr. Ann Hirsch, that helped me, motivated me to stay in the research track and go to graduate school. I would like to do that one day for someone such as myself that at the beginning struggled in my science classes and was told not to stay in science. And then later on, with someone like Dr. Ann Hirsch, helped me decide and believe in myself and feel more confident in myself to stay in science and hopefully help someone else in the future. Now, I decided to attend the University of California, Riverside, because I met Dr. Linda Walling, which is my professor now that she oversees my research. She went to UCLA as an invited speaker in Dr. Ann Hirsch's class, and I learned from her the research that she does. She does research with plant and insect interactions. So she works with how plants are able to defend themselves against insects such as caterpillars and whiteflies. And these are not houseflies, so they're very tiny flies that actually cause a lot of damage in crops such as cassava. And what my project entails is that I work with tomatoes, and there is a certain tomato line that produces more of a protein called leucine aminopeptidase, and this protein helps the tomato plant defend itself. The reason why, we're not exactly sure. We just know that this is a plant defense mechanism that the tomato has, and my work is to hopefully discover the signaling pathway of how this protein is able to help the tomato and deter caterpillars from feeding on it. And we actually have certain lines in the lab where there is a tomato plant that produces less of this protein, and tomato plants that produce more of the protein. And when we place caterpillars on these plants, we can see the foliage difference of these plants, so that the caterpillars consume more from the plant that has less of this protein, and consume less from plants that have more of the protein. Therefore, this shows that this protein is important for the plant immune response of tomatoes. What I want to study specifically is the function of this protein. It has several functions, one of it which is it's a chaperone. It is able to help other proteins refold and unfold and not aggregate, so that the proteins around it maintain their function. And another activity that this protein has is that it is able to cut other amino acids around it from proteins around it. So this has been studied in a test tube biochemically, and I want to study in the plant. I want to know where leucine aminopeptidase is acting upon what other proteins around it. And what I've done is optimized an experiment to get the substrates, which are the targets that LAP-A acts upon. I say LAP-A because it's leucine aminopeptidase A, and I want to make it shorter. So I say so many acronyms because it can be very difficult to keep track of so many acronyms that we use. So LAP-A, it has activity with certain proteins in the test tube, and what we want to know is what is its activity in the plant cell. It's in the chloroplast, so we hypothesize that it's acting upon something in the chloroplast, and I was able to find the targets of this protein. Now we want to know more about it. Which exactly does it bind to and cleave? Not just the hundreds that I found, because I found like a couple hundred proteins. Now I'm going to hone down on a couple and study those. And in my lab, there are other graduate students, and we all work as a team to find lab-based function. And there are other graduate students that work on the other part of Linda Walling's projects, which is the whitefly and cassava project, as I mentioned before. And there is another fellow that works with whitefly and alfalfa, which studies the whitefly and alfalfa interactions. And three of us are working with this protein called leucine aminopeptidase in tomatoes that caterpillars are responding to negatively. So that is a bit of a summary of what I work on. There are more details, but I don't want to bog you down with the details of what I do. And the reason why this is very interesting and important is because over 40% of crops are lost due to pests, pathogens, and weeds. And caterpillars are one of them that consume the tomatoes. So if we are able to better understand the function of how this plant immune response occurs, then hopefully we'll be able to increase the yields of crops around the world, and this will help us feed more people around the world and decrease the use of pesticides. If you have any more questions about my project or about anything to do with this UC Riverside or my research at UCLA, you are more than welcome to come talk to me afterward. Thank you again.
My name is Kay Odgers. I am privileged and honored to be here to introduce a lovely young woman that I've had the privilege of getting to know, who wants to help us with parents knowing how to channel their young daughters into science and math. She's right up our alley. We've been talking about Tech Trek. Her name is Kirsten Malama. I knew I'd do that wrong. And we talked about that because my daughter is Kristen and she is Kirsten because of a typo someone made many years ago. Here she is. Please enjoy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction. My name is Kirsten Malama, and my major is manufacturing system engineering. And first of all, I would like to say thank you to AAUW. They've really changed my life. Let me just give a brief how I knew about them. I went to see my doctor. And then she was like, you don't look well. So I was like, yes, I've got just so many things I'm thinking about because I have to go to school, I have to travel like 2 hours, and I have a son I have to come back to. He needs homework, and also I can't just work at this time. I have to concentrate on my engineering course. So then she says, I think, can I give you this website? These people helped me. I was like, what do you mean? So she gave me the website. I just threw it in the bag. I didn't even look at it. So after a month, I was like, what did she say again? So I went to my bag and put out the website. And then I said, okay, let me just look at it. So I looked at it, and then I tried to see if I can, sign up or something. And then it leads me to where it's asking to put in like $38. I was like, again, I don't have money, and then I have to put in $38. I was like, I don't think this is good for me. But I had already signed up up to a certain extent. So after some months, I received an email that says, oh, Kirsten, you didn't finish the application things. I'm like, these people again? Let me go back again. So I went back, and then I said, let me just try to see who they are. So I went on the website, read so many things. I said, they help girls, and I'm interested in girls. So I said, okay, let me just fill out the application. I filled out the application, and because I said I waste so much money on something else, and this was about the girls, so let me just give them. So I signed up and I forgot about it, and actually it changed my life after that because I'm just so honored to be here, and they really helped me, and I thank the doctor for introducing them for introducing the AAUW to me, and now I'm part of them, and I would like to be part of them forever, I think. So I just want to talk about a little bit about my research that I'm doing as an engineer. I'll start from when I was young, my elder brother, I used to play with my elder brother a lot. So I was like a tomboy. So we did a lot of things together. We made cars using, I'm sorry, I didn't say I'm from Africa actually. So we made cars using Play-Doh from the hill. We go and get some Play-Doh and make cars, we made phones, we made just a lot of gadgets. So I think my mind was just, tuned to that. So the reason why I'm saying this, I'm going to tie that to why we need to make sure girls are encouraged to do engineering. So I really learned a lot because we did a lot of things with my brother. So I feel parents pay a lot more to encourage young girls to do engineering. So my main interest, apart from other researches I'm going to tell you that I'm doing, is to also try and design a system or a model that will help parents encourage girls to do math, science. And my main theme is all we do, math is not look so hard. All we do is we just look for X. That's it. Because I don't know why most girls all the time, if they have a birthday, they have to go for girls' things. And when boys have birthdays, they go to these car toys. There's one in, I don't know if you know where it is, somewhere in, I've just forgotten the name. But boys are taken to technical places where they'll have fun, and the girls will play with dolls. So that kind of sends something to parents, even to our young girls, that they are not part of this engineering technology, which is not fair. So if we can design something that can encourage parents to really encourage the girls, or even just wear T-shirts about engineering, so the girls can feel so comfortable about the engineering course. So anyway, my research last summer, I did the research in high-strength aluminum alloys that I use to manufacture aircraft gear landing, and also fuselage, and also wings. So we looked at the mechanical properties, and we tried to manipulate the mechanical properties of aluminum alloy. We looked at corrosion, cracking. We looked at the microstructure inside. We also looked at the strength, mechanical strength of aluminum. So pretty much those things are the ones that we try to manipulate to get high strength. For example, in corrosion, when a plane is up in the air, it's exposed to an ambient temperature, and also the moisture content in the air. So those materials are exposed to corrosion. As you know, moisture in the air has got sodium chloride. So we assimilated some samples and put them in an assimilator, and we stressed them between 50 to 90% stress, and then we looked at the microstructure to see how much exposure corrosion does to such kind of materials. So we were trying to look at how best can we prepare our materials so they can be of high strength. So that's part of the research that I worked on in summer. And again, just this semester, professors also approached me that I also enter into another research of manufacturing, additive and manufacturing, 3D printing, which has got something to do with nanocomposite. As you know, 3D printing is a new technology that has just come, so there's a lot of research that is needed to be, researched, especially concerning the materials, how they fuse each other. Despite doing 3D printing, for example, of engine 3D printing, there is also some welding that's supposed to be done to the engines. You can't just print the whole engine completely, you're still going to weld it somehow. So the fusing of two components, there has to be some research to make sure that they have the same microstructure, and that's what mostly companies are trying to research to find out how they can match two types of materials, mostly even if they are the same, but when you weld them, there's just some microstructure changes as you weld them, as you put heat between those two. So you have to make sure the microstructure are the same. So that's where the issue is with most industries. Everybody talks about 3D printing, but it's not that easy because you need to measure two components of material together. So that's my interest, because previously I also did a research in aluminum alloys, as I told you earlier on. We were looking at 700 series. 700 series is just the type of material. There are different series, 300, start from 500, 600, depending on the composition of material inside. So we were looking at 775. And so since I've been looking at the material structure and microstructure, so this is also an extension of just what I've been working on. and I think I'll continue working on that. I'm interested in 3D printing. And in addition, I really want to pursue and help how mothers think about science, as they have a major impact on our girls. And my theme is just what happened to X. And pretty much that's what. If you have any questions about what I'm doing, you're free to ask me or talk to me. Thank you so much.
International fellowships are awarded for full-time study or research to women who are not U.S. citizens or permanent residents. The first was awarded in 1917, and Kathy Cloister is going to introduce our recipient.
Thank you, Sharon. My name is Kathy Cloister, and I am from the Redlands branch, and the Redlands branch has partially funded this endowment, this fellowship. They're not here. Can you hear now? Oh. Louder, okay. So I am pleased today to introduce Kamala Araújo. She is studying urban development at USC. She is from Brazil. She's only been in this country for 2 months, so is adjusting, and it sounds like she's adjusting very well. One thing she said about the Los Angeles area is people are very, very friendly. So, yay, that's good. She is studying urban development, as I said, with an emphasis on stabilization of transportation. And I said, wow, well, being in Los Angeles is a good place to study that. Little unknown, well, of course unknown, I never met her before, but a little fact about Kamala is she is a roller skating, figure skating coach. Having done that, being on competitive teams for about 15 years in Brazil. So, how fascinating. And then just one additional thing, Marilyn at our table said, well, I went to USC too, so you really must like football. She goes, I don't understand football at all. So perhaps that would be something for her to tackle. Kamala?
Good afternoon for all. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity and thank Kathy for introducing me. Is it better? Yeah. My name is Kamala Araújo. I'm an architect and urbanist, and I came from Brasilia, Brazil. Actually, in Brazil, we have this thing that all kids get around in playgrounds, and I'm sure here you have as well. But all of my friends were carrying dolls and saying they want to be a mom. And I was always the teacher or the daughter, or I was always the doctor or some profession. And my friends were like, Camila, why can't you just be a mom? I'm like, I want to be something else. I want to be a mom, but I want to be something else. And you're all moms. I can be something different. And they're always teasing me. One day, I don't know where I came from with this idea. I told them, I want to have a master's degree. And they're like, this is crazy. This is crazy idea. You're going to change when you're older. Well, I invite them all to my dinner to say goodbye to them, to come to the US and do my master's student. So on the dinner, I was saying, this is not goodbye. This is just see you soon. I'm coming back. And all of them told me, no, you're not. You're gonna get married and you're not gonna come back. None of them told me, you're gonna get a PhD or you're gonna get an excellent job and never come back. So my mom, in the end of the night, told me, I feel like you're not coming back. You're gonna change the world. And I hope I listen to my mom. I'm currently a Master of Planning student at the University of Southern California, and I'm shaping my education towards transportation. But I'm also pursuing the Sustainable Policy and Planning Certificate at USC. And this way I hope to achieve my goal of working with sustainable transportation. I believe this became my dream because, especially coming from Brasilia, that's a modern city, transportation and environment were always on my routine. were always issues, and I was always trying to solve them since undergrad. So in LA, everything is even more intensified, everything. And I think this cultural exchange and studying at such a prestigious university will be a life-changing experience for me. And this was only possible because of the AAUW, and I'm very thankful for that. And I'm working really hard to honor this award. So I believe transportation is a universal problem, and it's also an environmental problem, and that is why I'm doing both. So I'll try to work with both and try to interact between them so I can find a better solution to them. And I hope with these two programs to open my mind to all these problems, and part of it was changing my perspective. Coming from LA was a huge change for me. For the first time, I was standing at my garden looking up, and I could not see the stars. And I was, where are the stars? And I can listen to the traffic outside my window. That didn't happen in my city. And because of the recent fires, I went to the beach and I saw the sun setting into a smoke bed. It was my first great sunset ever. And I could imagine how I was living in a big city a few years back. I don't want LA or any other city in the world to go back to that. I want to change. Another change of perspective was trying to live here in LA without a car. It's difficult. I didn't know how to move around. I was a driver for 8 years. And LA doesn't wait for you. So I had to learn fast. I had to choose the way I was going to live, not only based on how good the place was, but how close to a public transportation, or how central, or even how close to my university, so I can walk or bike to class as I do. This is not a better or a worse way of living. The goal was for it to be different, because this way I'm not only studying new things about city, I'm living them as well. Well, academically, transportation were always part of my studies since undergrad. But professionally, as Kathy said, I always work with girls. I actually started working when I was a girl. I was 15, and I was a figure skate coach. And I worked with girls from all ages, all ages. I learned that the smaller part of my job as a coach was actually choreographing the routines and scheduling the practice. I had to teach these girls that they can dream higher, that they can dream different as I did, and that they can achieve these dreams if they work hard enough. I'm seeing them growing and becoming strong, independent women, and I'm so proud. The ones that started with me when they were 5 or 6 are now entering great universities. And the ones that were older had their own kids, or have excellent jobs, or are like me, far away, but all of them pursuing their dreams. And every victory for them is a personal victory for me. And I miss this part of my life every day. But very recently, I joined the Prize Women and Allied, the board of the Prize Women and Allied Association. It's a student association inside USC. And this way, I hope I can help enlarging women empowerment again at my neighborhood or my school. Thank you.
Community action grants are awarded to individuals, AAUW branches, and states, as well as nonprofit organizations to fund innovative programs or non-degree research projects that promote education and equity for women and girls.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here. My name is Roseanne Child, and I'm a joint member of the Greater Whittier Area AAUW and also Alhambra San Gabriel. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jessica. Jessica spoke at the Alhambra San Gabriel branch last year and shared with us the wonderful work that she is doing with the young women at the YMCA in Pasadena. Jessica has worked in the nonprofit for 16 years. This is her second time working at a YWCA, and she also has worked at Yahoo. She is married and has a darling little boy named Joey, who has aspirations of going to Caltech. So I say, go Joey. She also is expecting a little girl, and I'm sure that she's going to want to go to Caltech also. Something that I think is so interesting about Jessica K. Bell is that she is a baker. And for the past baker, she bakes pies. And she has won many prizes at the Los Angeles County Fair since 2010. And her favorite pie to make is a key lime pie. And she told me, and I said, I'm not a very good baker. What is the trick? And she puts a little teeny bit of vodka in it. And I'll let you have her explain how that works. But it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jessica, and I know that we're all going to love all the wonderful work that she does with the young girls at the YWCA in Pasadena. Jessica.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. So I want to thank you for having me back. I did get a chance to speak at the Alhambra branch earlier this year, and with the Redlands branch also. You can see there's been some new development since then in my family, as well as the YWCA. Sorry, this kind of keeps coming in and out, so maybe I should just kind of stay here. Where to start? So the YWCA in Pasadena has been around since 1905. We are one of the oldest nonprofits in Pasadena. We are one of the pioneering nonprofits specifically helping women. We started off as a safe place for women to live and to go to when they were entering the workforce in the early 20th century. We also had a pre-1920s racial integration plan, so we did not discriminate on housing for women who wanted to come and stay in our location. Since then, we worked for women's right to vote. We were one of the first rated crisis hotline numbers in Pasadena, started a Big Sister program, advocated for ERA, and so on and so on. We continue to do this work. For me personally, I grew up going to the YWCA in Santa Monica. My mom would take us there on the weekends. As she mentioned, I've worked at the YWCA San Gabriel Valley. I started off there in the domestic violence program for several years and worked with the nonprofits, and so I've been with this YWCA for about 5 years. But the reason the YWCA really has a place in my heart is I don't think I would be where I am now without having exposure to the YW in Southern California and Santa Monica as a youth, because like many of the girls in our programs, I grew up extremely poor. I mean, way below the poverty level. I remember going to donation centers to get clothes and to food banks with my mom, and moving out in the middle of the night from our tiny little apartment with my mom and my sisters because we couldn't make the rent and I get evicted and so on and so forth. So this kind of really developed who I am and why I wanted to give back as I got older. And as I got older and worked with different projects and was in school, knowing that I can potentially get out of intergenerational poverty if I focus on school. One thing that I heard a lot was, they can take anything away from you, they can't take away your education. And that has stuck with me for a long, long time. And it might also be that let me back up. I've been involved in activism for some time, and I think part of that came out of me growing up in the mid-90s punk rock riot girl scene and really being involved in women's issues. And if you had told 16-year-old Jessica that someday you're going to be the executive director of a women's organization, I would have been like, yeah, okay, right, I don't even know how to apply to college, and good luck with that. But here I am, and I'm proud to be a part of this organization that has programs for young women and girls. So I'm going to dive into that a little bit. With AAUW's help, with the Community Action Grant, we were able to continue all of the amazing programming that we have with our Tech Girls and our Express Yourself programs. That's our after-school programs for girls that are ages 10 to 14, so middle school kind of age range. And Tech Girls kind of, self-explanatory, it's STEM learning. We have a lot of different projects that they work on, whether it is involving 3D printing and coding, so they get to learn how to not just do the coding, but risk, trial and error in doing that coding. They got to make 3D printed cameras last year, and little prosthetics or wheelchairs for pets that are disabled, and to make sure they're workable and usable. They are also working with the Planetary Society. We have different partnerships that come in and help to facilitate the programs. They get to go on field trips to go visit Caltech and to go to the Apple Store and learn some of the programs there. And it also goes hand in hand with our Express Yourself program, which is our creative arts program. And this program not just teaches them, painting or sculpture, it also lets the girls kind of talk about their gender and cultural backgrounds that often go unheard. The girls in our program are 95% Latina and Black in the community that we serve in Northwest Pasadena. And what I want to say about Pasadena also, which I absolutely love, is that unfortunately, it's almost, there was a report a couple years ago that was called The Tale of Two Cities. We know Pasadena to be often very affluent. We've got the Tournament of Roses there. We've got some great colleges, but there's a portion of Pasadena, in Northwest Pasadena, which is underserved and underrepresented. And that's who we serve. So we pick up from 6 different schools after school to come to our program in this Northwest area. And unfortunately, in this area, it is not only economically depressed, it has, it's gone through a lot of gang violence in the past year. A lot of the girls in our program from there are from what was considered non-traditional families, whether they're living with grandparents or aunts or in foster homes. They have been more at risk to leave school at an earlier age. There's a multitude of things that have happened. And part of it is also because there has been, going back to pre-civil rights era, history of segregation in Pasadena as well. So unfortunately, this community is still dealing with that decades on. That being said, the public schools, excuse me, I get very excited about this, I have to talk a whole lot, so I start coming really fast. We work with the public schools there because we want to encourage public schools more. We know that the girls have the same aptitude as boys in sciences and in math, etc. I think a lot of us, at least I'm assuming, came up through public schools, and we want to make sure that it maintains its integrity and it's not ignored over to the private schools in Pasadena. And the public schools that maybe you and I grew up with had a lot of different programs probably after school, arts and different sciences maybe, and those things aren't being as available as they were. So it's falling on nonprofits like us to provide these programs. So here we are. Tech Girls grew out of a community survey back in 2008 or 2009 asking what we should be focusing on in our community. And after, after some time, we developed this program. Now, by doing so, by picking up the schools and bringing them to our location, they can actually come in, sit down, have like a girls' circle, kind of talk and bonding, and then we start focusing on the different projects that we have. Whether it is 3D printing, we do robotics, we also do some plant science, we team with, again, Planetary Society or Caltech and the Apple Store and STEAM coders and all these different great partnerships that help to come and facilitate the program. And with Express Yourself, with the arts program, they're able to do their poetry, do screen printing. We've partnered with Mujeres de Maze to come in and do different storytelling about their lives and what's happening. You can really see through their eyes what's going on rather than just trying to tell them, this is what you're going to do today, and we're going to color and we're going to do this. We get to see and hear what's happening from them. The other things that we get to do in the program is also create a bonding situation, a safe place or soft place to land for a lot of these girls who may be facing circumstances that aren't necessarily being told or conveyed. If you get them working and focusing on a project, they're more likely to talk openly about what's happening in their lives and how we as mentors can sort of help them through that and work with their parents and provide resources for them as well. And the YWCA is proud to continue this, and we could not do it without the AAUW. We really couldn't. This community action grant really does go a long way, and we're really proud to be a part of this. So thank you so much. The YWCA also has a few other projects that we do in the community. We have our Talking the Talk series, which is our community forum series. We talk about issues that are important and happening in our community, both locally and globally. We've had discussions about law enforcement and police brutality in regards to racial profiling. We have also talked about Islamophobia, LGBTQ violence that's been going on. We've talked about domestic terrorism in relation to, my brain's blanking out on the word, I'm sorry, on implicit biases, things of that nature. So it's not just educating our girls, we're helping to work with the community to discuss and come up with solutions to these different topics. So with that, the YWCA can't do it without people's support and different partnerships. And we hope to be continuing these programs for many, many years. And we hope to see more people get involved. And every year we have new girls coming in. And some of the results that we've seen with our program too is one of the girls that went through our summer camp and our after-school programs just recently got accepted into Cal State LA. And she's the first in her family to go to college. And so we're really excited for that. Her sister is in our program, so she gets to see her as a role model and see this as a real tangible, reality, not just a dream or something that's just out there that other people do and not them. We also partner with AAUW in Pasadena for their Tech Savvy program every year, which is the all-day science conference for girls. And our program coordinator teaches different workshops during that program. We've also seen one of our girls go from a D in science to an A. So we're really excited for her because I know she's had some difficult family issues. They've been affected by DACA and Dreamer laws being changed. We also advocate for that as well, where our advocacy efforts are have been an overdrive this past year, to say the least, when it comes to issues that are affecting women and girls of color specifically. There's so much more I can talk about with the YWCA and what we're doing and how we're doing it. So if you have questions about our programs or what we do, please come and see me after. I'd be happy to give information and be in contact. So thank you again. Much appreciated for all of your support. Thank you.
I would like to join everyone else in thanking all of you for taking time out of your lives to be here today. It's been so inspiring hearing our fellows. One question that has come up to me recently regarding the fires in Northern California and what we as members might want to do. I reached out to Sue Cochran recently. She lives in Santa Rosa. She was evacuated from her home. However, her home has survived. Yes, thank goodness, because many of our members have lost their homes. And she suggested that if you are interested in helping in Northern California, you may want to send donations to the Sonoma County Food Bank. She volunteers there regularly, and they are struggling financially in order to be able to feed the firefighters as well as those that are now homeless. Thank you again for being here, and I know you're going to take all of these wonderful comments from everyone and go back and energized to your branches. Thank you.
I might mention, many of you probably know Chris Wolf, and her home, 2 of her cars, 1 of her vineyards, and her office were destroyed. So her husband was able to save their cats, and they're okay. So we have a lot of our members affected by this. Judy Horan would like to talk a little about the Legacy Circle as well.
And I want all of you to see my new pin. I'm double-breasted today, so watch out. Anyway, I always like to say a few words, and I'm so glad Heather was here today because she is the person the really go-to person, and she's learning very quickly. We had a nice chat before the luncheon today, and I just have to tell you something interesting. When I got here today, I knew I was going to see some people I hadn't seen for a long time, but one of them was someone I really haven't seen for a very long time, and that's Maria Solis Martinez. And she's here, and those of you who know her love her, and I'm so glad she's back. And she said to me, she said, I said this morning, I'm going to the luncheon, I'm sure Judy's going to be there, and so I have to bring my checkbook. And for years, you know, I've been asking you for money. But now I don't want you to bring your checkbook, I want you to bring your trust and your will. So that you will consider joining the Legacy Circle, which is our planned giving instrument. And it's very easy. I left some information on the table over there and a lot of my cards. So if you want to start with me, I am the Southern California chair for the Legacy Circle team. And it's a job I'm never giving up. You know, kind of like Charlton Heston from my Cold Dead Dance. Anyway, I love the group, and it's a lot of fun. And we're trying to really get organized about getting more members interested in joining the Legacy Circle. We set a goal last year of 50, and we met it. This year we have set a goal of 60, and I know we're going to meet it, because I know the two people in this room today who told me they're going to take care of it really soon. So I know we have some Legacy Circle members in the room. Could you wave or stand or show us your pins? See, they're all here. Yay. Thank you. I think what really distinguishes our planned giving, you get millions of people get on any list and they're going to ask you to give money, you know, after you're gone. But I think ours is wonderful because it's very, very confidential. There is no specific amount required. You do not have to be a millionaire. You just can give something to AAUW. And everything is done very simply. I left some enrollment forms over there. And Heather and I both have pins today if you'd like to do it now. So we're always out there. And so what you're doing is providing for AAUW in your will or trust. You designate, or you can designate AAUW as the beneficiary of a qualified retirement plan, a savings bond, a bank account, or life insurance policy. Or you can create a planned gift that returns fixed or flexible income to you or others. So there's many things you can do in the plan, and I just really think you should start thinking about it. And as someone told me in the Palm Springs branch, I was there last month, and she said, oh, my kids know that I want my money to go to AAUW. I said, you better get your will and trust out and read it, because just saying that doesn't make it happen. And there is specific language that we believe in donor rights, don't we, Tony? And so we want you to do with your money what you want to have done with it. So please try to take time to look at that. And if you're like me, sometimes your plans, your life changes. So once in a while, take a look at those papers and see if they're right. I'm going through all of mine right now. So anyway, it's a wonderful group to belong to. And I need to tell you that, you know, California, how competitive we are. You know, there, as a state that's ahead of us in members in the Legacy Circle, Washington State is ahead of us. We cannot have that. So this year, I'm really going to be knocking on your doors. And if you know anyone in Northern California, Liz Bathgate will be on there knocking on their doors too. So anyway, it's a wonderful opportunity. I'm so glad Heather is aboard. I know she's going to do a great job, and it's wonderful that we have all the resources that we do to help us do this. So pick up one of my cards, or I'm in the directory for California, so you can say. And thank you, Sharon, so much for allowing me to talk.
I'd like to thank all of you again so much for coming. It's been a great afternoon. These young women are so inspiring, and I just love this part of my job. I just have a few housekeeping things for you. I want to remind you, December 31st is the deadline to get your donations into National if you want your donations to be credited for this donation year. And please try to get them in as soon as possible rather than waiting until December 30th, because then it's just, and then, they just get overwhelmed with all these donations. So it makes it much easier if you can even start planning now. We have contribution forms back on the table, a list of the unfinished endowments, brochures. I would like to remind you, and most of you know I say this every year, we have request forms for the fellowship and grant recipients, and you must go through the fellow scheduler here in California, because we have so many branches and not very many fellows, and we don't want to overwhelm them with a lot of requests. So please keep that in mind. Try to have at least 2 dates in mind in case they can't come to one, and also be flexible, because they're very busy. They travel all over the world. They're studying, they're working, and we appreciate that. So check out all the brochures. There's some of the executive summaries and whatever else you're free to take back there. So thank you again so much for attending today.